Welcome back, Camden Catholic. Oh man, first flip in a minute. All right, so we're gonna bang this thing out. It's not gonna be terribly long. It's actually a little bit on the short side. It's just kind of setting the stage for the incoming influx of large base movements by the Spanish in the Americas, right? So let's get into it. So the Americas. Now we talked about, when we were talking about the Spanish, we left off talking about mainly Columbus, right? How he landed in the Bahamas and started moving around and things like that. And this is going to start a huge chain reaction that's going to drastically affect the lives of the native people, right? There's a ton of stuff that I'm going to say today that aren't necessarily on the screen, so make sure you don't mute this, all right? So you're going to need to write some extra stuff down, okay? So let's get into it, though, all right? Now, after Columbus lands in the Americas, right? So on the first island he discovered, it was uninhabited by any human residents, all right? So he begins to pop around the Caribbean. Just so we know, go ahead and jot this down somewhere. Columbus never set foot on mainland North or South America. He was in the Caribbean the whole time, right? So the Taino, which is the natives of the Caribbean, originally when he met them, and that's the Taino people right here, welcomed Columbus with open arms, right? They welcomed him with open arms. They tried to engage with him in trade agreements and things like that. Now, the problem, though, is that this relationship's soon going to go downhill, right? When they actually refuse to accept Christianity. Now, at one point, Columbus even begins to bring people back as, like, he went on 2 separate voyages, right? On his first voyage, he even brought some of these Taino people back to the Spanish king as gifts of his discovery, all right? Now, here's a little backbone of this whole thing, right? Remember, Columbus, write this down, Columbus isn't as bad as everyone says he is. His biggest flaw was his inability to control the people he brought with him, all right? So what's going to end up happening when Columbus goes on his first voyage, right? He lands in the Caribbean islands, in the Caribbean sector. He bounces around through Cuba, Hispaniola, many different areas. He leaves people there as he goes for them to set up strongholds and to try planting flags and expanding the empire that is Spain, right? There's one instance where apparently when he was moving around all over these islands and stuff, 2 little stories I gotta tell you. He saw people wearing gold jewelry. What do you think? What do you think Columbus is gonna do? He's gonna go, whoa! Where'd you get that from? And then they're gonna tell him oh, well, we get it because we trade with. We don't have much, if any, at all. We also get a lot of extra from the Aztecs that live over in Mexico. Well, they didn't know the word Mexico, but they were there are Aztecs that live in the large area over there to our west, right? And at the time, the Aztecs were called the Mexica Empire, and they had more gold than they know what to do with, right? So the Spanish are immediately going to be intrigued by this, right? So he begins to bring these people back to the king as gifts and stuff like that. Now remember, what percent of everything he found did he get to keep? Good job, Norris. I heard you over there. 10%, right? He got to keep 10% of everything he found. So what ends up happening is when he leaves on this voyage, he tells the colonists, get these people that live here, the Taino people, to find as much gold and as much valuable items as they can. If they don't, you may punish them, right? They refused to accept Christianity, and because he was so ambitious about them finding goods for him to actually profit off of, there are accounts of different colonists assaulting people, right? There are accounts of colonists drunkenly murdering people. There were even accounts of colonists that Columbus left behind cutting off the hands of men who actually didn't bring enough gold back, all right? So a lot of dicey stuff was going down. A lot of dicey stuff, right? So Columbus' inability to actually control all of his people actually leads to him being arrested, and he gets brought back to Spain in chains after his second voyage, him and his brother. He actually died thinking China and India were right around the corner, thinking that he was unjustly defamated by the crown for arresting him for not controlling his own colonists, right? So he actually was never even allowed to go back after his second voyage, right? The other big and look at this. Look, this is the Taino people just chilling, enjoying life, killing it, right? Having cool huts and dancing over here and loving it. And then the Spanish showed up. The other problem, though, other than the extreme work that the Taino were submitted to, other than the fact that some of these colonists were flat out human rights violators to them. The biggest issue that happened is that Columbus was the first wave, all right? He was just the first wave of these people called conquistadors, right? Or Spanish conquerors, all right? Now, there are many more natives than conquistadors, but the Spanish had huge advantages, right? The biggest ones include guns, cannons, but the biggest one out of all of them, horses, all right? Some of you are like, wait a minute. You're telling me that a horse is more of an advantage than a gun or a cannon? Well, let's remember for a second. These guns they're using are very rudimentary by modern standards, right? They're muskets, right? You can only fire them one at a time. They take a long time to reload. They're not very accurate at all. Ask me tomorrow why the early guns weren't accurate, and I'll explain that whole thing to you. And then jot that down, somebody. The horses served as a huge advantage because the natives that they encountered did not have metal weapons, all right? They had stone tools. The Aztecs had obsidian tools, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. But they didn't actually have access to all of these things, right? So what's going to end up occurring, though, is these horses give the conquistadors a major advantage of speed, mobility, height. They're from an elevated position. They were armed with pikes and metal swords and things like that. So a group of conquistadors could decimate a group almost 1,000 times larger than them without even losing a single man. They also had armor, right? I'll write armor down somewhere, or metal weapons, all right? So these are huge advantages. Natives had never seen a horse before, right? So also the big lose for the natives as well is that the Europeans carried with them diseases like smallpox, influenza, measles, right? The natives had no immunity or resistance to these diseases. And some of you are like, well, wait a minute. Why? Why not? Why didn't they? So these diseases, these big three right here, they're contracted from animals, all right? The original strains of these diseases were actually animal-borne illnesses. We believe smallpox probably evolved in ancient Egypt from rodents. We believe that the measles possibly evolved, we believe the measles possibly evolved probably from large herd animals, right? So, and they changed, and these diseases made it so they could attack humans. Now, humans in Europe had been domesticating animals and cultivating agriculture for hundreds and thousands of years. So their bodies over the generations built up an immunity to these diseases, right? The natives had zero immunity to that. So 90% or 9 out of every 10 of the Taino people died in the Caribbean from these diseases. The other 10% were wiped out by the Spanish conquistadors. There are such a small minority of genetically Taino people left in the world. It's absolutely depressing, right? So, and then that's where we're going to stop. We're just talking about the Spanish's biggest advantages. We're talking about Columbus and the things he actually did versus the things he didn't actually do, right? So, because there's a huge debate right now about him, about whether we should honor him with a holiday and things like that. If you ask me personally, I think he is not as big of a deal as we like to make him out to be. I'm in the gray, but then he also isn't, you can't shame the man for discovering something that we now hold dear, right? So, but the biggest thing is, though, that's the flip for tonight. Told you, Gia. What's up? And I hope you all have a great evening. I'll see you guys tomorrow.